To part 6 of the Transformer tutorial series. In this part we will just be doing some work to prepare for rendering. And rendering is not going to be as simple as most animations, because we're going to need a lot of passes and render layers and all that sort of stuff. So I'm going to take you to the process I went through when I was doing this. I'm gonna start with looking at each layer and see excuse me, see what we need to do, what types of render layers we need to get this thing done and to make our lives easier in the compositing stage. So layer 1 seems to be the background, the ground plane, and the camera plane and everything. Yeah, so, okay, that's all fine. Let's look at layer 2. This seems to be the layers we used to shader, so we are not gonna need layer 2. Layer 3 is, let's see, the concrete layer below the asphalt, and this support part. And I am gonna go into the outliner and go to my visible layers and then press period to look for my support. I can actually also use the selected, that's easier. So that will only show the selected objects, and I'm gonna turn off rendering for this object because I don't need it. Same for this one, it's already turned off. And let's see, what's this? Oh, this is the particle kill object. I'm gonna also turn off rendering. I might as well change the layer of this object and move it to another layer, but since it needs to interact with the particles, I do need it. So I do need it to have it on the same layer, so I'm gonna just turn off the rendering and that will be fine. Alright, let's see if we have some particle systems. We actually don't. Let's take a look. Alright, layer. This layer below layer 3, layer 13, is the ground splashes, the water splashes. And I don't know why this object is here. Let's see. That might be just a mistake. Yeah, it shouldn't be there, so I'm gonna just delete this. Probably an extra duplicate or something. Okay, layer 13 is the water splashes and these debris objects and the droplet. So I actually want to move these 4 guys to layer 3. So press M3 and go to that layer, and here we have the selection. And then I'm going to make sure we do render these objects, but not only the particle system, so not the objects itself. So we need to go into the particle settings and search for the rendering tab. There we go. Turn off emitter for every one of them. Alright, so now the particle systems are being rendered and the object itself are not. Alright, cool, so let's move on. Layer 4 is the asphalt layer. The asphalt objects are on layer 4. And oh, there are the particles as well, and they seem to work, so let's leave it at this. And they do fall through the ground. That's because, of course, these deflectors are. Let's move these to layer 4. I don't know, I messed something up here probably in the previous part, but I want to move these to layer 4 so that the particles can interact with those. I didn't plan on doing this, but yeah, it seems to work. You can see the particles are being killed. They're very tiny, but it works. Right, you can see them here, and they're just being killed when they hit the plane. Alright, since these objects are turned off, the renderability, it's no problem. Okay, moving on, layer 5. This seems to only be the constraints and the proxy object, so I don't need to render this, only 1, 3 and 4. And for the robot, layer 6, that's the high density mesh. This is the layer 9, is the low density mesh, so I only use this for animating the robot. So only the layer 6, 7 and 8 are for the robot, and these lower layers are the armatures and stuff. So let's see if this works. Yes. Alright, so these are all the panels, and this is the robot. Alright, so now I know what object is on every layer, and I'm going to enable every object, every layer I need to render. And then let's select this sphere and make it a wireframe, because then I like it better when it's a wireframe. Anyways, now I can go into my render layer tab over here. This is a new tab since one of the latest Blender releases. I don't know, I'm not sure when it came, but at first it was under render settings, but now it's a separate tab for the render layers. So here we have the default render layer, and every layer is enabled, as you can see. The first render layer I want to make is just the robot. I want to render only the robot with a transparent background, so let's rename this accordingly, robot. And I only want to render a robot with a transparent background, so to make sure I can have transparency, I need to go into film and make sure this is checked. The default value is not checked, so make sure you enable this, and yeah, then we are good to go. So I want to render only the robot, so I could change the layers over here, but these are the scene layers, and when I change this, everything changes. When I have multiple render layers, these scene layers are not specific for the render layer, so I don't want to touch these. So what I need to do is go into the layers, and these are the specific layers for this current render layer. So I want to make sure I only check these 3 layers where the robot is at. And because I have my scene layers active, the ones where I have my environment lighting, for example, the robot will be lit with these environment objects, but they are not shown in the final render. So that's a nice little trick. It's actually not a trick, but it's just the way it works. So the robot stays lit with these objects, but they are not rendered directly. So that's cool. That's exactly what I need. And yeah, I'm gonna leave it at this. So the next render layer I want to make is for the debris. So only the debris, and which is the ground when it becomes visible, and these concrete objects and the splashes and everything. So these are on the layers 3 and 4. So enable those. Don't touch the scene layers. When you do this, when you change something here, it changes over here, as well as for every render layer. So don't do that. And when you temporarily want to show one of these layers and not want to alter these, you can uncheck this button, and when you now change these layers, the scene layers are not changed, but we don't need this in this case. I just wanted to mention. So, alright, we have a debris layer and a robot layer. The next thing I want to have is, well, we can do, when we render this, we can composite them into the shot, but it will look very fake because we don't have any interaction with the environment. Only the robot will have some reflections of the environment, but the actual ground won't have shadows and reflections of the robot. So next thing is the ground interaction. So I'm gonna call my next layer the background, and I only want to enable the first layer since this layer has the ground. So yeah, let's actually take a look at each of these render layers. So from the camera, yeah, let's first render only the robot, and to render only one layer you can check this little pin and it will only render your active render layer, in this case the robot. So if I now press F12, it has to synchronize, and then it will start rendering only the robot with a transparent background. Okay, so that works. We have the robot with a transparent background. This is perfect for compositing, and you can see it has a kind of a blue tint because it's being lit from with the environment layers, layer 1. Alright, let's do the debris. Let's test this layer. Just select the debris layer and press F12 and it will only render this layer. So now we should see something else. Alright, that doesn't actually look very useful. It seems there's something wrong here, but and it snaps back to the robot. That's just because this layer is set to composite, and you can just choose debris, and there we have the debris layer. Yeah, it doesn't look very useful right now. So to solve this, I can make use of these mask layers. And what are mask layers? Well, if you have any object on a separate layer which is in front of the objects on your rendered layers, they will be masked by the objects in front. So let's just show you what this will do. I can choose a mask for these debris layers, and what I want to choose as the mask is the foreground, or the ground actually. So layer 1 contains the environment, which won't be in front of any of those shards, so it doesn't affect anything, but the ground will be above this block of concrete, so this will be masking out the parts that are below the ground. So by checking this mask layer, it will make a huge difference. And to show you, I'm going to just press F11, and currently I'm in slot 2, so let's go to slot 1 and press F12 to render on a different slot, and then you can compare later. Alright, that seems more like it. So it snaps back to something else. Let's go to debris, and as you can see, we have a very useful alpha debris layer. So this is very useful for compositing. It will only show the debris that's bulging out of the ground, and the rest is just transparent. And to look at the differences, you can press J and it will snap back to the robot. Let's choose debris, and that will snap back. It's not very useful here. Anyway, this is the debris before I used the mask layer, and this is after. So you do want to make sure you have a mask layer. Alright, and talking about mask layers, when I'm rendering the robot, I do want to use a mask layer as well, because the way I'm going to composite this is I'm going to first have my original shot, and I'm going to composite the shadows and reflections, but that's something that comes next. Then I'm gonna composite over the debris, and after the debris I'm gonna composite the robot. But what happens when some debris is flying in front of the robot? Then the robot will occlude it because I'm compositing the robot on top of everything. So to solve this problem, I can choose a mask layer for the robot, and the mask layers I need to choose are the debris. So now whenever debris is flying in front of the robot, it will make that part invisible. And to show this, I may want to find some frame where debris is flying in front of the robot. Let's see. This little part is in front of the robot. So yeah, let's try this. Select the robot layer and press F12 to render only the robot. Alright, let's see if it worked. There is a piece out of this part of the robot. It's very hard to see, but yeah, trust me, it works. So yeah, it's this part. So when I go back, this part is cut out of the robot. So whenever I composite the robot on top of this debris, the debris that is over here is still shown. So that's great. Alright, now the robot and the debris are fairly simple layers because we can just composite them over the shot and it will work. But the background is something else. So let's look at the background render. Alright, okay, it snaps back to the robot. Let's choose background, and we can see the background render, and it looks pretty cool. We have the reflection of the robot and some shadows, but the problem is we cannot use this directly because we also have the shadows and reflections, or more the reflections of the environment, and those are already part of the original shot. So the problem is we have to make a distinction between the robot or the extra shadows and reflections and just the default ones that are already there, and we don't need to composite them extra. So how I solved this problem is I rendered another layer, and I'm gonna call this background clean. Background clean. And the thing I did with this one is I just copied the same settings, so just this one layer, but then in the exclude layers I excluded the debris and the robot. So now one thing I have to explain, we can see the reflections of the robot, but we cannot see the robot itself. So that's pretty cool. And the reason we have this is because those robot layers are enabled, but they are not directly visible. These layers are the layers that are visible in the current render layer, so only the ground and the background. So what I want to do here is render just only the background and no effects from the robot or the debris. So to do that, to remove this, you have to exclude those layers explicitly in this exclude layer part. So if I now render the background clean, it will render exactly the same, but not the robot, so, or not the reflections and the shadows. So let's test this, and it will go much faster. So of course, the downside of this solution is it will take a little bit more time to do this because you need 2 render layers for this. So let's switch to the background now, or background clean. And as you can see, it's exactly the same, except for these robot reflections. They are now gone. So, and this is very useful information, because now we can make a distinction between the original reflections and the robot reflections. And I'm going to do that in the compositing stage. And maybe I'm going to do that this part to just save out everything as useful files. So yeah, this is the render layers we need, and we're almost done setting these up. Actually, we are done, but before I want to go into passes, I need to fix something, because here we can see the camera plane. If you don't know what I mean, it's just this plane, the camera plane. It will show the original shot behind everything, and then we have this reflection over here of the sky, and then here the reflection of the sky is a lot darker and more blue. And this is actually a problem, because then it should be the same, so or roughly the same. So what I want to do is quickly go into the material for the sky, or for this sphere, and make it a little bit brighter to match the sky of the camera plane. Alright, so yeah, let's go to compositing, for the compositing layout, and go into the material of this environment. Let's see, oh, there we go. I already did some color correction, but I need to do some more. So yeah, I think it's very important to match those sky colors. So let's go into the rendered view, and as you can see, it's a lot of difference. So let's actually mute this node and see what we... Alright, it's... I think I'm gonna just reset this. I don't know why I made it so dark. Yeah, I think the most important thing for this color correction is to match this line, to remove this line a little bit. So yeah, let's do it. Let's make it a lot brighter. And remove some of the blue. To the green. Oh, that's actually pretty good. Alright, it starts to match. Let's look at it from the camera view. And now I almost don't see a line anymore. And actually, what you can see here, I enabled this button called background, and when you enable this, it will only render what's happening in here, what you set here. It will render, and if you don't do that, it will just render everything. But it's actually pretty useful to do this. So yeah, and we can even do the background clean. It goes much faster because it only renders the background. And here you can see a slight line. I may have to make it a little bit brighter. And there we go. I think this is much better than we started with. Alright. So yeah, I messed something up in the previous parts. I don't know why I did that, but it's fixed now, so we can move on. Alright, so I set up all the render layers. Next thing is the render passes. The passes are actually splitting out every render layer in a diffuse part, a glossy part, a transmission part, emission, everything you see here can be used for color correction. You can to use this, you can, for example, color correct only the indirect diffused lighting. It's very cool and very flexible after rendering. So once we render and we composite and it does look good, we can still change a lot of the settings. So to start, I'm going to set the render layers for the robot layer, or the render passes, I'm sorry. I'm going to set the render passes for the robot render layer. And the ones I want to use are direct, indirect, color, for diffuse, for glossy, since we have a lot of reflections on the robot going on. Transmission as well, because we have some transparent windows. Emission, because we have those eyes. Those are emitting light. And this is all fine. I don't need a Z pass, and the combined pass is always useful. And I actually do want to have a vector pass, but I had some problems rendering the vector pass in cycles. So I probably will go into the internal render engine and render the vector pass separately. So yeah, that's a little bug, because what I experienced was my computer took like an hour per frame when I enabled this vector pass, and when I didn't, it took like a minute. So there's something going wrong here with cycles and all these objects, probably. But with the internal render engine, it did work. So yeah, I'm gonna just do that. So only enable these layers, these passes, and move on to debris. I don't need a Z pass for the debris, because sometimes it's useful for atmospheric effects, but since all these objects are pretty much at the same distance, we don't really need this. I'm going to enable all the diffuse passes, all the glossy passes, no transmission and no emission, because the debris doesn't... oh, actually, I do want to enable the transmission passes, because the debris has some water splashes, and we need to yeah, we need to have transmission because water is transparent. Yep, alright. Moving on to the background. Again, I don't need the Z pass. I do want to have all the diffuse passes. I'm going to use the diffuse passes for shadows, and I'm going to use the glossy passes for reflections. And yeah, that's it. Same for the background clean. Exactly the same. And that's it. Alright, so we set up all the render layers and all the passes. And now before I want to render, I can render everything out in one single file by using multi-layer. But I'm not going to do that, because that will use a lot of disk space. I'm not going to need every one of these passes directly. I'm going to first combine them in the node editor and then save them out. So yeah. And since I'm running out of time, I'm not going to do that in this part. We're already on 30 minutes almost, and yeah. So in the next part I will do something what I call pre-compositing, and that means we're doing some compositing before we're saving out all the render passes we need. So we are going to combine some of the render passes and then save them out to save disk space. And yeah, so good luck. I hope you understand everything I thought you this part, and I will see you in part 7.